You really thought I would stay forever just because I never complained? Simone Carter's words stopped Daniel Park 3 steps from the private elevator. It was 5:17 in the morning, that strange blue hour when Manhattan looked almost innocent beneath sheets of cold November rain. Behind Daniel, the penthouse stretched through marble, glass, and shadows, an empire suspended above the city. Ahead of him stood the one person he had never imagined leaving it. Simone. One hand rested around the handle of a small black suitcase. Daniel's eyes dropped to it. For 3 years, he had seen those hands carrying his coffee, arranging his suits, replacing untouched dinners after midnight. He had seen them bandage his knuckles without asking whose blood had dried beneath his cuff. But he had never seen them holding a suitcase. Going somewhere. His voice was calm. Controlled. The voice men twice his age obeyed without hesitation. Simone turned. She was 28, beautiful in a way Daniel had trained himself not to notice, deep brown skin glowing softly beneath the elevator lights, dark curls falling loose around her shoulders, her simple black coat tracing an elegant silhouette. But there was something different about her this morning. No uniform. No lowered eyes. No quiet, professional smile. Home, she said. Daniel's jaw tightened. This is your home. For the first time, something almost sad touched her expression. No, Mr. Park. Her eyes remained steady. This is where I work. The elevator chimed. Daniel froze. Outside these walls, people whispered his name. Korean-American businessman shook his hand while pretending not to know how his empire had been built. Men disappeared after betraying him. Restaurants emptied when his security detail entered first. Daniel Park understood loyalty. He understood fear. He understood exactly how much money it took to make almost anyone stay. But he didn't understand why Simone Carter was walking away. The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside. And something unfamiliar moved beneath his ribs. Fear. Not the kind that came with guns. Something worse. Something helpless. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below, and if you believe love means seeing someone's worth before it's too late, hit like and subscribe. Now, back to Simone. Daniel took one step toward the elevator. Is this about money? Her fingers tightened around the suitcase handle. That tiny movement should have warned him. Instead, Daniel reached instinctively for the only language power had ever taught him. I'll double your salary. Simone looked at him. Silence. Triple it. Still nothing. The doors began sliding inward. Daniel had negotiated with killers without blinking. He had watched guns placed on tables and calmly finished his drink. Yet 2 closing pieces of brushed steel suddenly terrified him. Simone. Her name came out differently this time. Not an order. Almost a plea. She looked directly into his eyes. I never needed you to pay me more, Daniel. It was the first time in 3 years she had used his first name. His breath stopped. I needed you to see me. The doors closed. Daniel stood motionless before his own reflection in the polished steel. 17 seconds. That was all it took for the most powerful man in the room to finally understand what 3 years had failed to teach him. Simone had never simply been part of his house. She had become the quietest part of his life. And now she was gone. 3 years earlier, Simone Carter had arrived at Daniel Park's penthouse carrying everything she owned in 2 suitcases and absolutely no intention of becoming important to anyone inside it. She needed a job. Nothing more. At 25, she had already learned that survival became easier when you stopped expecting the world to notice how hard you were trying. The elevator opened onto 40 floors of Manhattan wealth, Italian marble gleaming beneath warm chandelier light, dark walnut walls, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city like something Daniel owned. Simone stepped out in a simple cream blouse and black skirt, her dark skin glowing against the pale stone, her curls pulled neatly behind her head. Michael Park met her near the foyer. "Mr. Park values privacy," he explained. "You don't ask about visitors. You don't repeat conversations. And you never enter his study without permission." Simone nodded. "Understood." Then Daniel appeared. He came down the hallway in a charcoal suit, phone pressed to his ear, speaking Korean in a voice so quiet that everyone around him seemed to listen harder. He was 33 then, already powerful enough that newspapers called him an investor while detectives used different words behind closed doors. Daniel ended the call and glanced at Simone. 1 second. Maybe 2. New housekeeper. Simone Carter, Michael replied. Daniel gave a small nod and walked past her. That was their introduction. No handshake. No welcome. Simone should have been offended. Instead, she almost smiled. Being invisible suited her perfectly. For the first few months, they barely spoke. Yet invisibility allowed Simone to notice things other people missed. Daniel drank black coffee when he had slept well but added a single teaspoon of sugar after nights when nightmares kept him awake. He hated overhead lights after midnight. He skipped dinner whenever meetings involved his uncle. And every October 14th, he stood alone before a framed photograph of an elegant Korean woman in the library. His mother. Simone never asked. She simply stopped scheduling the vacuuming near the library on that date. Daniel noticed. He said nothing. Then came the coffee. One winter night, he entered the kitchen at 2:13 a.m. after a meeting that had left 3 armed men stationed downstairs. His tie hung loose. Exhaustion darkened his eyes. A cup waited beside the espresso machine. Daniel stared at it. Who made this? Simone looked up from folding linens. I did. He took a sip. 1 teaspoon of sugar. His gaze sharpened. How did you know? Simone folded another towel. You only come into the kitchen yourself when you can't sleep. Silence settled between them. Most people became nervous when Daniel stared at them. Simone simply continued working. You pay too much attention, he said. She finally looked at him. That's my job. Daniel walked away with the coffee. He told himself that was all it was. Competence. Convenience. A good employee learning her employer's habits. He didn't notice when he began returning home earlier. On evenings Simone worked. He didn't notice that the penthouse felt colder on her days off. And he certainly didn't notice that whenever a room was crowded with expensive suits, beautiful women, and men desperate for his approval, his eyes had begun searching automatically for one quiet woman who never asked him for anything. Daniel Park could recognize an enemy from across a room. What he could not recognize was love when it was standing 10 feet away. The first time Simone Carter touched Daniel Park, there was blood on his hands. It was 1:47 in the morning, nearly 8 months after she had started working at the penthouse. Rain struck the floor-to-ceiling windows in silver streaks, and Manhattan burned beneath the storm like a city too restless to sleep. Simone was in the kitchen putting away dishes when the private elevator opened. Daniel stepped out alone. His charcoal shirt was wet at the shoulders. His tie was gone. A thin line of blood ran from his right hand and disappeared beneath his cuff. Simone's fingers stopped around a porcelain plate. You're bleeding. Daniel barely glanced at her. It's nothing. He walked toward his study. Simone watched 3 drops of blood strike the white marble behind him. You're ruining the floor. Daniel stopped. Slowly, he turned. Most people would have apologized immediately. Simone simply opened the cabinet beneath the sink and removed the first aid kit. Sit down. His eyebrows lifted. Was that an order? A request to protect very expensive marble? For half a second, Daniel almost smiled. Almost. Then he sat at the kitchen island. Simone rolled his sleeve back carefully. His knuckles were split, but the deeper cut crossed his palm. She smelled rain, antiseptic, and the faint cedar of his cologne. Daniel watched her clean the wound without flinching. "You're not going to ask what happened?" Simone kept her eyes on his hand. "Would you tell me the truth?" Silence. Rain whispered against the glass. "Probably not," he admitted. Simone reached for fresh gauze. "Then I won't waste your lie." Daniel stared at her. Really stared. He was accustomed to fear disguised as respect, curiosity disguised as concern, attraction disguised as loyalty. Simone offered him none of those things. Her touch was gentle because he was injured, not because he was powerful. Something about that unsettled him more than any threat he had faced that night. "You're strange," he murmured. "I've been called worse." She taped the bandage into place and released his hand. "Done." Daniel looked down at the white gauze, then back at her. "Thank you." Simone nodded. "Good night, Mr. Park." It should have ended there. Instead, that night became the beginning of rituals neither of them acknowledged. Coffee waiting at 2 in the morning. A covered plate when Daniel missed dinner. The curtains opened before sunrise because Simone had noticed he slept better when morning light entered gradually. And on evenings when Daniel returned particularly quiet, Simone sometimes sat at the opposite end of the kitchen island without asking a single question. Daniel began coming home earlier. He told himself he preferred his own bed. Michael Park knew better. One evening, Michael watched Daniel interrupt a conversation when Simone laughed softly with another employee across the room. Daniel's eyes moved toward the sound before he could stop them. Michael followed his gaze. "Interesting." Daniel looked at him coldly. "What?" "Nothing." Michael lifted his whiskey. "I've just never seen you notice a housekeeper laughing before." Daniel said nothing. Across the room, Simone smiled again. And without realizing it, the most guarded man in New York listened for the sound. The woman everyone believed belonged beside Daniel Park arrived wearing diamonds. Claire Hahn stepped from the private elevator on a Friday evening with the effortless confidence of someone who had never entered a room wondering whether she belonged there. She was 33, Korean-American, elegant, educated at Columbia, and the daughter of a family whose money stretched back farther than Daniel's legitimate businesses. On paper, Claire was perfect for him. Simone Carter understood that before Daniel even introduced them. "Claire Hahn," he said. "Simone handles the household." "Handles the household." Simone smiled professionally. "It's nice to meet you, Ms. Hahn." Claire's gaze moved over her with polite curiosity. "Daniel has mentioned you." Simone's smile nearly faltered. Daniel had mentioned her. Hopefully nothing terrible. Claire laughed softly. "Actually, he said you're the reason this place functions." Daniel had already turned toward the dining room, apparently unaware that those words had landed somewhere dangerous. That evening, the penthouse glowed beneath amber chandeliers. Crystal glasses caught the candlelight. Korean executives, attorneys, and men whose expensive smiles concealed darker occupations filled the long dining table. Simone moved among them in a fitted black uniform, graceful and almost invisible, pouring wine while conversations drifted between English and Korean. Claire sat beside Daniel. She looked right there. That was what hurt. Her hand occasionally touched his sleeve. Their families shared memories Simone could never enter, Seoul summers, Korean holidays, names spoken with familiarity. Then Daniel reached automatically for his coffee. He took one sip and frowned. "Sugar." A server froze. "Sir." Before Simone could stop herself, she stepped forward. "He takes 1 teaspoon after 10. Daniel looked up. "Not tonight." Simone replaced the cup with black coffee. Their eyes met for barely a second. Claire noticed. Later, when dessert arrived, she watched Simone place a small plate near Daniel without asking. He had ignored every elaborate dessert on the table. Simone had brought sliced pear instead. "You know him remarkably well," Claire said. The table quieted just enough for Simone to feel it. There was no cruelty in Claire's voice. That somehow made the words sharper. Simone straightened. "It's my responsibility." Daniel barely looked away from the document Michael had handed him. "Simone knows what I need." Silence. Michael's eyes lifted immediately. Claire's smile remained perfectly composed. But Simone felt something inside her shift. Daniel had said it casually, like describing a reliable watch or a familiar room. He trusted her. Needed her, perhaps. But did he see her? Hours later, Simone carried empty glasses past Daniel's study and heard voices through the half-open door. "The Hahn family wants clarity," an older man said. "A marriage would settle everything." Simone stopped. Michael answered quietly. "Daniel hasn't agreed. He will. Claire fits his world." Simone didn't wait to hear Daniel's response. She walked away before anyone could see her face. In the small staff room, she stood before the mirror and slowly removed the pins from her curls. For 3 years, she had told herself the warmth in her chest was loyalty. Gratitude. Familiarity. Tonight, surrounded by candlelight and a woman who fit Daniel's world perfectly, Simone finally stopped lying to herself. She loved him. And the cruelest part was not that Daniel might choose someone else. It was that he might never realize there had been a choice at all. The first thing Daniel noticed was the missing coffee. At 2:06 a.m., he walked into the kitchen after a 14-hour day and found the marble counter empty. No porcelain cup. No single teaspoon of sugar. No covered plate beside the stove. He stood there longer than he should have. The penthouse was silent, but not the silence Daniel preferred. This one felt hollow. Over the next 2 weeks, other things disappeared. Simone stopped waiting near the foyer when he returned late. She stopped reminding him that his dinner was getting cold. She stopped asking whether he wanted the curtains opened before sunrise. Nothing about her work suffered. In fact, she became flawlessly professional. That was what disturbed him. "Good morning, Mr. Park. Your 9 o'clock meeting has been moved, Mr. Park. Dinner is ready, Mr. Park. Mr. Park. Always Mr. Park." Daniel began to hate the sound of his own name in her mouth. One afternoon, he found Michael in the study reviewing financial reports. "Is something wrong with Simone?" Michael slowly lowered the page. "Simone. She's been different." "Different how?" Daniel's jaw tightened. He disliked explaining things he believed should be obvious. "Quiet." Michael stared at him. "She has always been quiet. Not like this." Something resembling amusement crossed Michael's face. "Interesting. What is that you noticed?" Daniel's expression hardened. "If there's a problem with an employee, I need to know." Michael leaned back. "An employee. That's what she is." The amusement vanished from Michael's face. "You mean besides watching you build a future that doesn't include her?" Daniel went still. "What are you talking about?" "Claire. Claire has nothing to do with Simone. That," Michael said quietly, "is exactly the problem." Daniel's voice turned cold. "She works for me." Michael held his gaze. "Exactly." Silence filled the study. Daniel dismissed the conversation as ridiculous, but the words followed him for days. Then he made the mistake that changed everything. The Hahn family requested a formal dinner at the penthouse, a gathering of relatives, investors, and allies where Claire would stand publicly beside him. Daniel called Simone into his study. She entered carrying a tablet, beautiful and composed in her black uniform. Saturday. 40 guests, Daniel said. Full dining room. Korean menu for the family, Western options for everyone else. Security will send you the guest list. Simone's fingers paused against the screen. Of course. Daniel continued reading the documents before him. Claire will be seated beside me. Coordinate with her regarding flowers and table arrangements. A beat of silence. Of course, Mr. Park. Something in her voice made him look up. Simone was smiling. Perfectly. Professionally. But her eyes were different. Daniel felt the same instinct that had warned him before ambushes and betrayals, a quiet certainty that something important had just shifted beyond his control. Simone. She stopped at the door. He almost asked her what was wrong. Almost. Pride reached his mouth first. Nothing. Simone nodded. Good night, Mr. Park. The door closed softly behind her. Daniel returned to his papers. Simone walked down the hallway without allowing herself to cry. She had spent 3 years waiting for a man who could read danger in a stranger's eyes but could not read love in hers. That night, she finally understood something Daniel did not. Sometimes dignity did not mean fighting to be chosen. Sometimes it meant knowing when to leave. Simone Carter made Daniel Park's most important dinner flawless, then quietly prepared to disappear from his life. Saturday evening arrived beneath a sky the color of steel. Inside the penthouse, candlelight burned against crystal glasses and polished silver. 40 guests moved through the rooms in tailored suits and evening gowns while soft piano music floated beneath conversations about money, alliances, and families powerful enough to change lives with signatures. Simone moved among them in black, composed and beautiful, every detail under control. Claire Hahn sat beside Daniel exactly where everyone expected her to be. Cameras flashed when the two families raised their glasses. Simone watched from across the room. Daniel caught her eyes once. Something tightened in his chest. Then another guest spoke to him, and the moment disappeared. By midnight, the last champagne glass had been cleared. Claire left with her parents. Michael disappeared into the study. Daniel loosened his tie and found Simone alone in the dining room extinguishing candles. Everything went well, he said. Thank you. Simone looked at him and smiled. You're welcome, Mr. Park. Again. Mr. Park. Daniel hated it. But before he could understand why, she walked away. At 6:30 the next morning, a white envelope waited precisely in the center of his mahogany desk. Daniel recognized Simone's handwriting immediately. He read the resignation letter twice. Then a third time. At 6:41, Simone entered the study after he summoned her. You're quitting. Yes. Why? It's time. Daniel leaned back, studying her as if she were a negotiation he could solve. Double salary. Simone shook her head. No, 3 times your salary. I'll move you into the guest apartment upstairs. Daniel, a car. Health insurance. Whatever you need. Her expression changed at the sound of his desperation disguised as generosity. Stop. Nobody told Daniel Park to stop. He did. Simone stepped closer to the desk. You keep offering me reasons to work for you. Her voice remained gentle. I'm trying to tell you I don't want to anymore. Daniel's fingers tightened around the letter. Then what do you want? Simone stared at him for a long moment. There were 3 years inside that silence. 3 years of coffee. Late-night conversations, bandaged hands, quiet smiles, and feelings she had carried alone. Something you can't offer me without first understanding why you're offering it. Daniel said nothing. For once, money had reached the edge of its usefulness. Simone turned and left. Hours later, he passed the staff corridor and noticed her door standing open. He stopped. The room was nearly empty. Her books were gone. The photographs beside the bed were gone. The perfume that had faintly scented the hallway was gone. Only a forgotten ceramic mug remained beside the window. Daniel stepped inside. The room was small, smaller than he remembered. He suddenly hated that. 3 years beneath his roof, and this was the space he had given her. He picked up the mug. Downstairs, Simone closed the final suitcase. Upstairs, Daniel stood in the emptiness she left behind and finally felt the first crack in something he had spent his entire life believing was unbreakable. He had thought losing Simone meant replacing an employee. Standing inside her empty room, Daniel began to understand that no one could replace what he was actually losing. 17 seconds. That was how long Daniel Park had to understand 3 years of his own life. At 5:17 the next morning, the private elevator chimed, and Simone Carter stood before it with one black suitcase in her hand. The city beyond the windows was still dark, Manhattan blurred beneath cold November rain. Daniel had just returned from a meeting when he saw her. For one irrational second, he expected her to smile, take his coat, and tell him there was coffee in the kitchen. Instead, she pressed the elevator button. Going somewhere? Simone turned. Home. This is your home. The sadness in her eyes was almost unbearable. No, Mr. Park. This is where I work. The doors opened. She stepped inside. Daniel's pulse changed. He had faced armed men without raising his voice. He had watched businesses collapse because he made one phone call. Yet the sight of Simone standing inside that elevator made something primitive tighten beneath his ribs. Is this about money? Wrong question. He knew at the moment her expression changed. I'll double your salary. Silence. Triple it. Simone looked at him as if she were waiting for him to hear himself. The doors began to close. Simone. She pressed the button to hold them. Daniel stared at her, suddenly aware that he had no idea what words came after her name. Then she said it. I never needed you to pay me more, Daniel. I needed you to see me. The doors started closing again. And memory struck him with brutal clarity. Simone placing coffee beside him at 2 in the morning. Simone sitting across the kitchen island while he stared silently into darkness. Her fingers wrapping gauze around his bleeding palm. Would you tell me the truth? Probably not. Then I won't waste your lie. Another memory. October 14th. His mother's photograph. The library mysteriously left untouched so he could grieve alone. Another. Simone laughing in the hallway. Daniel stopping mid-conversation simply to hear it. Another. A covered dinner plate waiting after midnight. Another. Drive safely, Mr. Park. Again and again, ordinary moments returned like evidence presented before a man who had spent years refusing to examine the case. Daniel finally understood what terrified him. It wasn't losing the coffee. It wasn't losing the dinners, the order, the quiet competence that made his home function. He was terrified of waking tomorrow and knowing Simone existed somewhere he could no longer hear her laugh. Somewhere she might build a life that had nothing to do with him. Somewhere another man might look at her and immediately recognize what Daniel had been too blind to see. His chest tightened. Wait. The doors continued inward. Daniel moved. Simone, wait. He reached the elevator just as brushed steel sealed shut between them. Silence. Daniel stared at his reflection. No guards. No enemies. No weapon he could fight. Only himself. He pressed the button once. Then again. Nothing. The elevator was already descending. Daniel turned toward the windows, breathing harder than a man like him ever allowed anyone to witness. Behind him, the penthouse remained immaculate. Marble. Glass. Wealth. Everything exactly where it belonged. And suddenly none of it felt like home. Daniel Park had spent his entire life believing power meant never needing anyone. It took watching Simone Carter walk away to discover the crueler truth. He had needed her for years. He had simply noticed 17 seconds too late. Daniel Park could have stopped Simone Carter with one phone call. He had men downstairs who would have blocked every exit before her elevator reached the lobby. He had drivers who could follow any taxi in Manhattan, security teams who could locate a person before most police departments finished filing paperwork. 3 years earlier, Daniel might have called that power. This morning, for the first time, it felt like cowardice. "Where is she?" he asked when Michael answered his phone. "Daniel, it's 5:30 in the morning. Simone left." Silence. Michael understood immediately. And Daniel stared at the glowing elevator numbers descending toward the lobby. "I need to find her." "Then go find her." The line went dead. Daniel froze. No orders. No bodyguards. No one to solve this for him. He grabbed his coat and took the next elevator down. Outside, rain swept across Park Avenue in cold silver sheets. Simone stood beneath the awning half a block away, one hand gripping her suitcase while she searched for a taxi. Daniel saw her and stopped. For a moment, the feared Korean-American boss looked strangely ordinary, dark hair damp from rain, expensive coat hanging open, breathing hard because he had actually run. Simone. She closed her eyes briefly before turning. Daniel approached, but she raised one hand. He stopped. That single gesture halted a man hundreds feared to disobey. "Don't," she said. "Don't offer me more money. I won't. Don't offer me an apartment. I won't. And don't tell me I belong in your house." Rain tapped against the awning between them. Daniel swallowed. "I don't know how to do this." Simone's expression softened, but she remained where she was. "Do what?" He looked at her suitcase, then at her. "Ask someone to stay." The word seemed to cost him more than any confession he had ever made. Simone's eyes shimmered. "Then don't ask me because you're afraid of being alone." Daniel stepped closer, slowly this time. "I'm not afraid of being alone." He paused. For once, he corrected himself instead of hiding behind pride. "I was never afraid of it before you." Simone's breath caught. "Daniel, I remembered everything after those doors closed." His voice dropped. "The coffee. My mother's anniversary. The nights you sat with me when I couldn't sleep. That ridiculous mug you left upstairs." A fragile smile almost touched her lips. "You hated that mug. I hate that it's still there and you aren't." Silence. Daniel looked directly into her eyes. "For the first time, I know exactly who I'm losing." Simone wanted to believe him. That was precisely why she couldn't surrender now. "You noticed me because I walked away," she whispered. "I need to know you can still choose me when I'm free to stay gone." Daniel's face tightened, but he understood. Slowly, he stepped back. No command came. No threat. No bargain. A taxi pulled toward the curb. Simone placed her suitcase inside, then turned once more. Daniel stood beneath the rain without moving to stop her. "Goodbye, Daniel." His jaw clenched. "Goodbye, Simone." The taxi disappeared into the gray morning. Daniel remained on the sidewalk long after it was gone. He had spent his entire life believing love meant protecting what belonged to him. Simone had just taught him something harder. If he truly loved her, he had to let her discover whether she would ever choose to come back. 6 weeks passed before Daniel Park saw Simone Carter again. In those 6 weeks, the penthouse remained immaculate and somehow felt abandoned. Another housekeeper made his coffee perfectly. Daniel stopped drinking it. Dinner appeared precisely at 8. He barely touched it. On October 14th, someone vacuumed the library while he stood before his mother's photograph, and Daniel finally understood how many acts of kindness Simone had given him without ever asking to be thanked. But he did not call her. He had promised himself that if Simone ever returned, it would be because she chose to, not because Daniel Park had used money, fear, or influence to pull her back. He changed other things instead. The proposed arrangement with Claire ended first. Daniel invited her to lunch and told her the truth. "There's someone else." Claire studied him for several seconds before smiling faintly. "The woman who knew about the sugar." Daniel almost laughed. "Yes. You were the last person in Manhattan to know." Then came harder changes. Daniel stepped away from alliances built only on obligation. He stopped treating loyalty as ownership. Men around him noticed that his commands became fewer and his questions more frequent. Michael noticed most of all. "She taught you something," he said one evening. Daniel looked toward the empty kitchen. "She taught me too late." "Maybe," Michael replied. "Maybe not." 3 nights later, Daniel attended a charity exhibition in Brooklyn supporting scholarships for young women returning to college. He nearly declined the invitation. Then he walked into the gallery and forgot how to breathe. Simone stood beneath warm golden light across the room. No uniform. No tray in her hands. No reason to lower her eyes. She wore a deep emerald dress that complemented her dark skin, her curls falling freely around her shoulders. She was laughing. Happy. Free. Daniel had always known Simone was beautiful. Seeing her outside his world made him understand how much of that beauty he had once mistaken for background. Simone turned. Their eyes met. The room seemed to lose its sound. Daniel did not cross the floor. That mattered. The old Daniel would have approached because he wanted something. This Daniel remained where he was. Simone's smile faded into something softer. She could walk away again. He knew that now. More importantly, she knew he would let her. Seconds passed. Then Simone took one step toward him. Then another. Daniel's heart struck hard against his ribs. When she finally stopped before him, neither spoke immediately. "You look different," she said. "I am." "That confident?" "No," a small smile touched his mouth. "Terrified." Simone laughed softly, and Daniel closed his eyes for half a second, hearing the sound he had missed for 6 weeks. "Coffee?" he asked. "Not come home. Not work for me. Not stay. Just coffee." Simone studied him. "1 cup." Daniel nodded. 1 cup. Later, at a quiet table beside the gallery windows, Daniel pulled out her chair and waited until she chose to sit. There was no employee standing before a boss. No woman trapped beneath his power. Only Simone Carter and Daniel Park, meeting again as 2 people free to choose what came next. He had once commanded hundreds of people to stay. But the woman he loved taught him that love meant nothing if she wasn't free to walk away. And that night, when Simone reached across the table and placed her hand over his, Daniel finally understood what dignity looked like, and what it meant to be chosen.